Do you guys ever think about dying?
Hey sis, welcome to the Mama Trauma Barbie podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Wagner, and while I'm tough as a mother, sometimes I know we're all out here, tired of needing to be one. Buckle up as we land the mothership and all things motherhood in the real world. Before we move on, I'd like to thank the incredible sponsors who saw an opportunity to support women in their day-to-day journeys by joining together to make this podcast a reality. Thank you, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Pansition with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for believing in better care, better support, and better outcomes for mamas and their families in the real world. This is part 2 of my interview with Beth Lambert, Executive Director of Epidemic Answers, discussing toxic load and its implications not only on our health, but our society as a whole. Buckle up, and we've got lots to talk about. The information provided in the podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, health, or nutritional advice.
That's literally all you need to do to get started. Because but you have to know it to be true. And this is why we've been aggregating stories, of people who have recovered from all kinds of conditions. We have a YouTube channel at Documenting Hope where we're starting to load those stories up. They're video stories. We have stories on the epidemicanswers.org website and on the documentinghope.com website, all these stories of people who have reversed their child's chronic condition. If you know that that's possible, your subconscious mind, and it's your intention to have your child heal, your subconscious mind will start looking for the things that align with that truth. If you are in a place where you're like, I kind of hear what she's saying, it's all kind of overwhelming, really don't want to change my diet, this sucks, I hate this, if you are in that contracting kind of mindset, but I don't really believe what you're saying about healing is possible, I'm not ready to change, that's your biggest barrier. You are your biggest barrier the minute you put your mindset in one direction or the other. But I have witnessed for 15 years that being the single most important beginning step is your mindset. I know my child can heal. And then everything else you take 30 seconds by 30 seconds, minute by minute, day by day, and you'll learn all the things. This is all why we created an online community you've been alluding to. It's called Healing Together. And we literally created a roadmap. We call it our healing trail map, and it's a journey, like step 1, step 2, step 3, so that if you are beginning, you can start at the beginning. We created it as a community because nobody should do this alone. And there's tons of people going through this. This is why our conference was so awesome. It's because these people that sort of kind of connected online were high-fiving each other, being like, oh my God, hugs, let's do this together. And then if you have a community of people and you're like, I don't know how to change the diet, you got all these people you can lean on, people that have done it before, people that are going through it. And that's the absolute best way to do this. Nobody should do this on their own. When I went through my family's healing journey, my sister and I were doing it together. So I'd call her and be like, what did your kid's poop look like today? Is it better? Things like that. You can't necessarily just talk to anybody about, but somebody who's on the journey and has shared goals, you need that backup. You need that support. Mm-hmm. I don't know, she's fine. And I'm like, no, she's not, because it was enough symptoms that were concerning to me and made it hard for her to get through the day. This is when she was little, like toddler age. But what happened as a result of that experience of just knocking on different doors, the last door I knocked on ended up being an integrative physician. And she was somebody who basically treated autism, PANS, PANDOS, autoimmune diseases from a functional medicine perspective. And so when I got in there, she was like, oh yeah, let's run some labs. And when you see the labs, you see things are out of balance and you're like, oh, that's fixable. That's fixable. And then from there, I learned about diet and environment, and it just, cascaded from there, where I just learned all the things, and we turned her health around in no time. It was like less than 9 months. But the thing that was most compelling and why I really got into this is in the offices of the more integrative, holistic people, dietitians that I started seeing, I started talking to parents sitting in the waiting room. And I was hearing stories of mostly families who had recovered their kids from autism or autoimmune diseases. And I was like, I thought those were genetic. So I had my mind blown just talking to other parents and their experiencing of reversing diagnoses that I thought were genetic. I learned they were not. And then at that time I was like, I got to bird dog this thing down. If this is possible, if there's all these kids, because autism is really extremely impairing for most kids who have it. I mean, there's 40 to, I think 40% are either moderate to severe. So like autism is a very big word that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And there's people who are sort of more mildly who mask or who have gotten to be adults without a diagnosis. I'm not really talking about that piece. That's a whole separate conversation. I'm talking about the people who are non-speakers, who can't toilet themselves, even though they're 10 or 12 years old, haven't learned to toilet, severely impacted families. I met families who had those children who are now adults, have gone to like prestigious colleges, who had, intractable seizures that they've recovered from. Like those are the kinds of things that blew my mind. So that's when I decided to really dig into this. I wrote a book. I was in graduate school at the time. So I wrote a book about it because I couldn't even believe that healing is possible for all these severely impacted people and no one's talking about it. Like, how's that even possible? And I'll tell you why no one's talking about it, because the answers are not patentable. Mm-hmm. The answers are not something you can own and sell. And in our country, like healing is about sort of breaking from our culture. It's about eating whole foods. It's about cleaning up and not using products. It's like counterculture to American culture. Like we love our stuff and things. We love our latest product and our, latest beauty thing and this nice smelly thing. Like that's American culture. In order to heal, you need to break from that. That's why we're not hearing about this front and center first thing when you get a diagnosis.
Yeah, it's certainly a decision that's going to require sacrifices. I had to sell my restaurant. I had to come home. I had to do homeschool for my daughter for 6 months unexpectedly. And so you really do have to make a decision, put a line in the sand. And, for me, that's where I was with it as well, Beth, is I was just staring at this and I just laughed one day, right? Because I'm a pretty spiritual person. And I was like, these are the miracles that are so possible. Our bodies were actually designed to heal. Mm-hmm. They are well informed. They know what they need, but unfortunately, we're giving them everything that goes completely against what's going to help us be healthy, from our work environments to the toxicity in relationships to, even schedules for our children. I mean, we haven't even touched on education, which I want to make sure that we get into. But what really moved me was knowing that this was possible and that these are the miracles of today. And so, I mean, you just really sit with that and like, it really is mind blowing, right? Like we're looking out here for all these things. I mean, I was at something the other day where there were a bunch of, girls and like, the newest, latest product for teenagers is called Drunken Elephant. And just right, the name of it for kids. Okay, we could start and stop there, but like, what's in it, right? And so I'm sitting here and I'm just laughing. Like we say, this is not, we're not fighting flesh and blood. And so this is the stuff too, that from a spiritual level, it's like, look, we got to wake up. Like these are the things that we have to choose and say no to. I get that they're fun. I get that there's things that are in this that maybe felt good before, or there's going to be things that you're going to have to put down. I know for us, this for 5 years has been financially astronomical. We haven't been able to travel. We haven't been able to go out to eat as much, which we don't anyways, because a lot of, restaurants don't have the type of food that we can eat. But that even right there, like that's really difficult. It's one of the reasons that I invested in an organic, clean restaurant, because I couldn't go to any anymore. And so, these are just the sorts of things that as parents are listening, it's like, look, we get it. This is hard. This is an intentional conversation. It is an easy one when you know that it's going to improve your health. And that's what I really want to slide into next. And I haven't done this with anybody yet, Beth. And I feel like I want to do it with you on my own personal level. But even for parents listening, I see on these forums that I'm in, like the Pans and Pandas forums that I'm on, these families are falling apart. These are not people that are on your regular social media feed. They are on your social media feeds. They are the regular people that are in your neighborhoods. They are the parents at your schools. These are the people that you work with, but nobody's talking about this because nobody is saying that their kid is throwing a chair through the window and breaking it. Like someone who called me the other day, a new client. Nobody is talking that their kid is scratching their face off and self-harming. Nobody is talking about their kid running around their house screaming. Nobody's talking about their kid that says that they feel like they want to die. Nobody's talking about their kid that they took to the psych ward over the weekend. And so I want to talk about this. I want to talk about some of the symptoms that a lot of families, this is not the stuff that you're hearing at work. It's not the stuff that you're hearing on your social media feed. So can you outline for some of the parents listening? Because I see this, like they come on there and they're desperate and they're like, here are some of my symptoms. And so, there's the soft signs, right? There's colic as a baby, there's difficulty breathing, there's eczema, there's signs of anxiety and depression. But I mean, what are some of the stories from parents that you've heard that would help some of our listeners identify, like, these are extreme things, and these are things that are happening to a lot of families?
Yeah, I think one of the hardest parts is the behavior related stuff, like with something like PANS or PANDAS, which is an autoimmune attack on parts of the brain. And the symptoms depend on where in the brain, like I was mentioning before, the basal ganglia, that might, affect your motor area of your brain. You might develop tics. You might develop OCD and perseverative behaviors. Some of that can be more subtle, but when you have things like rage, that is very common with a condition like PANS and PANDAS. But people don't know what it is. They don't know what PANS and PANDAS are. I mean, there's a group of brave physicians who have sort of pioneered and gotten this recognized by the NIH, and they're really pushing forward best practices with how to do it. But the very common scenario is that kids have psychotic episodes, like literally psychotic episodes, what you talked about with like throwing a chair, into the window, or, the red rage that just is like, parents can only describe it as crazy. My child is crazy. And there's a documentary film called My Child Is Not Crazy, which is great because it's about PANS and PANDAS. And there's some other films about PANS and PANDAS. And there's some amazing organizations out there that have, support for when you're in crises. But we don't, as a culture, recognize that as a thing. It's, reasonably new in terms of how long it's been around and how long it's been recognized. But these kids oftentimes end up in mental health institutions, psychiatric wards, getting on 3, 4, 7 medications to try and manage the symptoms. And no one's saying, all right, could this be a brain on fire or a brain under attack? I do think the Netflix movie Brain on Fire, which was about Susanna Callahan, I think is her name, who developed a type of PANS, was good for sort of raising awareness about what's happening. But what I would say to parents who are in that situation, when you have these extreme behaviors, and sometimes it's extreme OCD, right? Like maybe the kid isn't raging, but they're like washing their hands 75 times a day, or maybe constant trips to the bathroom. That's another one. Vocal tics, things like that, eye tics. If that's where you are, you need to have your reserves and your capacity to deal with this. So I often say, like, no matter how bad things are, do what you need to do to get your child managed. Like if it's taking an NSAID, which is a non-inflammatory medication like ibuprofen or something, do what you need to do so that you can give yourself what you need to get through this, because it's going to take capacity. So, how can you get somebody to help you so you can get a little respite, you can get to sleep? Like, what can you do to fill your cup up a little bit first before you, focus on what you need to do with your child? In that situation, it's like, you need to do what you need to do to get out of crisis. There are some amazing practitioners out there who specialize in PANS and PANDAS. Dr. Nancy O'Hara is one of them. You probably saw her at our conference.
Yeah, she was amazing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you just look for. There's another one we had that focuses on PANS and PANDAS, and she's a naturopath, and she's in California. Her name is Jennifer Barr. So there are these physicians who specialize in this. But again, before you really decide that you're going to dig in on this, like, do what you need to do to make sure you have support, you have help. Like, do you have family you can call in? Do you have friends? Like, explain to them what's going on and what you need. It's okay to ask for help too. It's totally okay to ask for help. A lot of times you hit on something which I think is so important with regard to parenting, is that it's our egos on the line. Like, my kid's misbehaving. My kid is crazy. What's everyone going to think? Or are they going to judge me? Like, there's this, we just keep it quiet because we don't want people to know that we're struggling. And that's the worst thing we can do. We need to lean on people. Just explain, like, my child's got inflammation in the brain and I need help. Can you do this? It's okay to ask. In our in our Healing Together membership community, we have this, again, I mentioned this sort of schemata of a journey, like a trail map, a healing trail map. And we have a section on it that we describe as crisis quicksand, which is like, you're never going to get into the healing place that you need to get into until you can get yourself out of crisis. And then you can sort of begin to make a plan for how to chip away at the diet and all the things in the environment that you need to work on. But like, it's okay to work on yourself and to give yourself what you need to, so that you have capacity to help your child.
Yeah, you bring up a really great point that I would love. I can't remember which physician it was, and I should have looked before the podcast, but in your book, Brain Under Attack, there's a physician. You guys go through some interviews with different physicians, which I loved because it gives you different strategies. And based on where your comfort level is with treating your child, you have space to maneuver around and do that. And so I loved hearing the different perspectives from the different physicians. But there was a physician. It said, what are the top 2 things that you would do would you suggest to a family struggling with PANS or PANDAS? And the number one thing that he said was, you have to reduce the stress in the home. The toxicity of your home will continue to feed the environment, and it will just feed the immune response because it's triggering, right, all of these different stress hormones in their body. And so I thought that was really interesting because as somebody who's been through this, right, on the front end, no idea what's going on, I'll be the first to admit that first of all, let me back up. If you have sudden onset with mental health symptoms, like sudden, that's not normal. And that's a really great indicator for families to hear on this podcast, that there is something physiologically going on that could be the immune response breaking. Right. And so for us, that's what happened when our daughter was 4. She went to bed one night and she woke up the next day a completely different kid, completely emotional, nonstop crying. She stopped eating. She was urinating frequently. And I mean, we'd never heard about this, 6 years ago. And so it was devastating. I mean, we almost took her to the hospital. A lot of people are. And again, a lot of physicians aren't even educated on this. However, because we didn't know, we stuck with her. We did everything that we could. Well, after that, she became very behavioral. And there was a lot of issues of things that she was doing that, here's what people were telling me. Well, you just got to discipline her more. You got to put more lines in the sand. You got to make sure that they know who's boss. And so, I didn't always handle things right. And it's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this and why I want to also educate parents. And I had a meeting with someone the other day and we're kind of going through this. How did you get into this? And I told him the story of how I had a client call the other day and their kid threw a chair through the window, and he wasn't listening. He's like, "Oh, my kid would never do that." And I'm like, "No, you don't understand. This is what's happening. This could happen to your kid, and these aren't bad kids." And so his response was, "Well, my kid wouldn't do that because they're not a bad kid." No, these are not bad kids. These are sick kids. And I really want to take time in this podcast, in this moment, to let a lot of parents right now that look, if your kids are behavioral and you're beating your head up against a wall and you feel like you're failing as a parent, it's likely not your parenting. Some of your kids could be sick with underlying health conditions that could be causing symptoms that are causing them to feel terrible. And so, that was, we did a lot of timeouts, we did all the things that when she was younger, and just finally it just clicked one day that it's like, this isn't what's going on. And so I just want parents, because then you're feeding this environment that it's like, they're so little, they don't understand, they feel terrible. And so I just love that component in the book. And I want to just bring it out here for families listening that, continuing to discipline them is not the answer. Finding what's going on and getting them the help or the right testing is going to pay dividends for helping you get your family back on track.
Right. And that what you described too is like a place where people are in crisis and they don't know what to do. And we're trained to think that, these things are behavior is a function of parenting. It's a fraction of what goes into behavior, right? so much of it, as you mentioned, is about what else is going on in the body and the brain and what's physiologically out of balance. One of the things that I've learned over the years, which I didn't know at the time when I was sort of going through this healing journey with my family, I learned partway through, is that our children are so entrained with what our nervous system is doing. So like there are some kids that's more the case and less the case, but for the most part, especially with mom, sometimes it's with dad, but our kids literally mirror our nervous system. So if we're like fried because our kids tantruming and throwing things and raging, like who's going to, like, we have this like fear that people are going to judge us, or that, you know, like, oh my God, my kid's always going to be like this. My kid's always going to be crazy. Like, you go to that place. But if you have the ability to just check your own nervous system and just take deep breaths or do whatever kinds of, you know, methods that can help you regulate your own nervous system, that will pay off for your child. And sometimes it's letting the rage go and just, you know, just being a safe space for your child and letting them know that you're not judging them. You understand that they can't control themselves. A lot of times they can't control themselves. Like, it may make us so angry or so frustrated, but like just the knowledge and knowing that they can't control it, it's not their fault, can, you know, be so helpful for getting parents through those moments, and having the capacity to be able to just sit still and be a loving, caring, safe presence for your child in those moments. I had to learn that at some, you know, because I also saw behaviors as like, oh, I'm a bad parent. You know, we have to understand that they can't control it. Their brain and their body are out of control. And once they're through the crisis, that's when you start putting your action plan into place. That's when you start making the incremental changes you need to make to bring that total load down on their body. Because a child who's raging, hands down, without a doubt, their total load is too great, period. So that's, you know, an instruction to you to say, all right, once I'm through this crisis, once I'm through this moment, I'm going to start chipping away at that total load. I'm going to bring in the health supports. I'm going to get them outside. By the way, outside is the greatest place for, you know, if you have a safe space outside, not like on a city street, you know what I mean? But like being in nature is a great place for everybody to regulate their nervous system. So, you know, that's a good place to start.
But you bring up a good point, and my previous guest in episode 0, we took some time here for a second, right? A lot of us grew up with trauma. I mean, 2/3 of our entire population has been traumatized. And I think we need to keep that into consideration, right? And so a lot of us knew like, hey, this is how we were parented, and we know we don't want that, right? Like that's not how I want to do it. But then you find yourself with some of these children who are neurotypical, who have behaviors, who are acting out. And right, you said it a minute ago, you've been trained, or you know you don't want to do it the way that you saw it, but you don't know what to do, which sometimes can just equally be as devastating, right? And so I love that you walked through this a bit, and I want to walk through it a little bit more, that when your child is raging, it's like when my daughter had colic and I left the hospital. I knew nothing about colic. I had no idea she could get colic. My pediatrician says that she was one of the like most severe cases of colic that he had ever seen. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Like, what's wrong with my daughter? What am I doing? Right. And so you take that from 0 to 3 months, but then you fast forward to a toddler, right? To a teenager. If you just know that these childhood epidemics are going on, if you just know that your kid could be sick and you're running into some of these behaviors with them, I think you just said it beautifully. And I heard a mom, I overheard her at the conference, and her child was really struggling and in one of those tantrums. And she just got down face level and she looked at him and she said, what do you need? And he's like, nothing. I don't need anything. And so she was on the floor. And so she backed up and she just sat there and she said, I'll be here when you're ready.
That's what I'm talking about.
And said nothing. And so I want to be very specific with parents right now. I also want to be transparent. There have been times for me over the years where I have looked at her and said, you know what? I see that you're very upset right now. I will be in the kitchen, and when you're ready to talk, I'll be here. So there's also been times where I've needed to exit stage, right? You know, and that's okay. So like you said, it's really like, what's your capacity? Like if you're going on, you know, where they get a virus and it takes, you know, you're going through 3 weeks of absolute hell trying to, you know, work this through their system. Like, listen, you do need to take care of yourself, and it's okay to stare at them and to be like, you know what? I love you. I see that you're upset right now. Do you need anything? No, leave me alone. Great. I'll be over here. And honestly, it's one of the absolute best things that you can do. Or if you are there and you're able to be present and just, do you need anything? No, and scoot back and just sit there and be with them. I've done that before, and Liv has on her own come over to me, and it could make me emotional talking about it, because I wish someone would have told or explained this to me, how incredibly simple it is. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it easy that you're going through it. It doesn't make it easy to see your kids sick, but to know how to just be present and be there for them and love them. I mean, sometimes, honestly, these feel like tests in humanity. Like, I sit there with her sometimes and I'm like, this is just the overall gift in general with human beings. Like, when somebody's feeling this way, to just sit with them and be present. No words, just to share space. Like you said, that energy of just being there, being present and loving on them. Like it's really that simple, isn't it? And so I wish, and I'm so glad we took some minutes with it, because if it helps one person deal with this better than how I know me and a lot of other parents are on the front end, like, yes, this is hard. It's something your kid could be going through. You can do this, and now you know how to do it better.
Mm-hmm. And it's counterintuitive to how we as parents tend to be. Like, as parents, we're like, we want to fix it. We want to help.
Yep.
Like, we do to help our kids. But sometimes, I mean, this is a unique experience, what we're describing here. There's not several thousand years of human evolution to fall back on to say, this is what you do in this scenario. This is unique. And we have to develop tools for dealing with it. And I think that's to retrain ourselves, to not react, to not act, but to sit and be still, as you described. It's hard.
What would you say, some of these more, I mean, I'm hearing it everywhere, right? You could, like you said, it was very beginning of the podcast, there is a host of things going on that are contributing to toxic load. But a lot of the things I'm hearing lately, right? Like, we have our autism, we have our pandas, we have our sensory processing, OCD. We kind of have a camp over here. And then we have anxiety, depression, asthma. We have chronic, like, kids getting sick a lot, the earaches, right? If you end up going to the doctor with some of these behavioral issues, and what I'm hearing a lot of parents tell me is, they're showing up, they're telling them their kid's behavioral, and they're getting an antidepressant. And we somewhat hit on this at the beginning, but I want to go back. These antidepressants, while good with intention, they have a black box warning for children. Right. Suicide is the second leading cause of death in kids aged 10 to 24. It makes sense that some of them, with their neuroinflammation, right, they can feel like they want to die because they feel so terrible all the time. But I want parents to understand that one of the reasons that antidepressants have a black box warning is because they can cause suicide in kids. And so I want to say that out loud, to not shame anyone for their kids being on this. It's not to make anybody feel bad. But when you look at that statistic, right? We had Nadia on again as the last guest in episode 0. And she said something that's so profound that I think is going to be a theme through this entire podcast. Things don't happen suddenly, they happen gradually. And I feel like we are in that right now in our country. You know that, Beth. I know that. But I want, with other parents on here, like, there are things that are happening right now that are gradual, that if we can catch them, if we can understand that these things are happening, they're contributing, we're not going to end up suddenly with a situation where maybe someone we really love is going to find themselves in this situation. It's not necessarily that your kid needs to go off the antidepressant, but what are the other things that can and should be looked at? What is the condition of their gut? Once you heal that, maybe they wouldn't need the antidepressant. If they have an underlying infection, if they do have chemical toxicity. But it's heartbreaking on these forums, again, because this ain't something you're seeing on your Instagram or your Facebook feed, y'all. And some of you listening, you're not, you're in this. What is the recommendation for those families? Like, where do they start?
Well, first of all, if you have a child who's on an SSRI, you really need to have that managed by somebody who's knowledgeable about titrating off of them. There is a black box warning for a reason, and I wouldn't mess around with that. And I'm not giving any medical advice. I'm saying go find somebody who is experienced in titrating somebody off of a SSRI or antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication. The other thing to say that I will say is very, very common, especially with anxiety and depression, is there's often, it's a total load. Like it's a function of total load. So again, you start working on those triggers and getting things down. There's often one, sometimes two major triggers that can be life-changing when you remove them. So as an example, I have a friend who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And it turns out that dairy was a major trigger for this person. So it's oftentimes, remember we talked again about like the leaky gut where you have foods going in every day. And if they're leaking through the epithelial lining and they're going into the immune cells they're partially digested. So what does the immune system say? Oh, that's an invader. I'm going to get it. So every time that dairy goes in, I'm going to attack those dairy, that should be digested, that's underdigested, and create inflammation. And where's that inflammation go? Especially when the blood-brain barrier is open, goes to the brain. So wheat is probably the biggest trigger of mental health symptoms. So you can
wheat and gluten, just to verify for people. So wheat and gluten, that's the same thing. I do not want to assume that everybody knows that. So I just wanted to take some time to go through that.
Yep,
Please go
exactly.
ahead.
So a lot of times people will find tremendous relief just doing a gluten-free diet. Like you were talking about at the beginning, like people think it's a fad. Actually, they're doing it because it's taking the inflammation down and stopping the brain on fire. Gluten-free, dairy-free. And it isn't like everybody needs to go off gluten and dairy, although I would say gluten in particular is inflammatory for everybody. But what do you eat every day? What does your child eat every day? Like, let's say your child eats an English muffin with peanut butter and orange juice every morning, and their lunch is a sandwich with whole wheat bread and turkey. Like, what does your child eat most frequently? Chances are, if your child's having episodes or whatever it is, behavioral issues, depression, anxiety, one of those foods that they're eating every day, sometimes multiple, are a trigger. So today in 2023, there's so many replacements you can use. Now, I wouldn't say that these would be long-term replacements. Like if you're going to go out and buy Udi's bread, it's like absolutely nutritional, like garbage, but it can get you off of the gluten if you're trying to go for a gluten-free diet. Like do the shortcuts and the hacks that you need to today while you're working towards a longer term plan to get more nutrition and to change the microbiome, et cetera. So my number one thing is you almost think about these foods that you eat every day as like constant triggers, constant inflammation. So if you're like, well, this, it's just pizza, it's no big deal. Well, that's causing the brain to be on fire. So find an alternative for now. And then you can work on learning about diet, learning about nutrition, and how to over time improve the nutrition that's going in and changing the microbiome. There's a number of great diets out there, but the GAPS diet is a really wonderful diet for increasing, for rebuilding that gut lining and increasing the diversity of the microbiome and restoring gut health. So that's a long-term solution. That's what you're working towards. But seriously, what is your child eating every day? Also sugar. Sugar is inflammatory.
Sugar was huge for our daughter. And I think that's something that sneaks in. And so I'd love for you to take some time and tweeze that one apart a bit for us.
I mean, it's the standard American diet is just so filled with sugar. Every holiday, every birthday, like it used to make me crazy when we went through a healing diet change and everybody had birthday parties, and I'd go to these birthday parties with my kids, and they'd be like blue cupcakes and M&Ms. Like just the sugar is mind blowing. I almost feel like it's like we're a drug. Well, sugar is the most addictive. It's more addictive than cocaine, and it is a country that we live in that is completely addicted to sugar. So it's hard to navigate, but it's also okay to kind of withdraw for a little while from that stuff, from the birthday parties and the activities for a little while you do what you need to do, because sugar has been so normalized in our society that it is hard to be a part of this culture and not participate in the sugar fest. Sugar is very, very inflammatory. It's the most inflammatory thing you could put in your body. I guess, unless you're bioindividually reactive to wheat or dairy or whatever it is. Other triggers can be corn. You mentioned about the mold. Yep. It's bioindividual, right? Like, again, what does your child eat? What have they been exposed to? What's their history? Think about their history of antibiotics. Like they had antibiotics, and what did they eat afterwards? Because you just destroyed your microbiome with the antibiotics, and then the foods that went in afterwards are likely to be triggers because you have a compromised gut when those foods went in. Corn, soy, dairy, sometimes eggs. They put They put the flu vaccines for a long time have been cultured in egg, so that can be actually a trigger for people. Eggs. So it's again bio-individual, and there are food sensitivity tests you can do. You can go for a food allergy test, and you can come up negative, and you can be like, well, we're not allergic to anything. It's not an allergy. It's a sensitivity, which there are no gold standard tests for right now. So the food sensitivity tests are like a barometer, but they're not, gold standard that allergists are going to use them. Some do. That's changing. I think the food sensitivity tests are getting better, but there's tons of companies that do them. You can do that, like a finger prick one, and lots of companies do them just to see which way the wind is blowing. Like you will get a food sensitivity test, and then you find out that like wheat is off the charts. Well, you should take that out. Like try. It's worth trying, and you can get them for like less than $100 now. So I would recommend that people consider food sensitivity tests, because then you're gonna know what the triggers are, what's causing inflammation every day. Take it out. It's the easiest thing in the world to take wheat out. Easiest thing in the world to take dairy out. Easiest thing in the world to take sugar out, so long as you're not like, again, interacting in birthday parties and what have you.
It was interesting. I had a new client show up the other day, and we did a food diet. And so when I got that back, it was, they were having a gluten-free waffle in the morning with maple syrup. They were having a Crustable for lunch, which has as much sugar in it as a candy bar. And they were having a scoop of ice cream before bed. And so you start adding some of this stuff up, or you start understanding that some of the prepackaged stuff that's out there, I mean, the sugar content, like let alone for one of those, right? For a kid who might have gut sensitivity or have microbiome issues. Again, if you have a leaky gut, that's escaping and that's going, right? That's causing, for a lot of people, neuro inflammation. So when we're asking ourselves, like, why are a lot of these kids not feeling well? Or do they have anxiety, depression, or, are they presenting with rage or chronic fatigue? Because this sugar is working your system, right? Nonstop. And so a lot of these kids as well, they're tanked, right? With their immune systems trying to just constantly keep up. And so it was interesting for the parents, right? To understand like, oh, like we didn't realize that these things had as much sugar in them. And so again, a couple of years ago when we got really strict, when we really like hung our flag high on completely revamping our cupboards, our diets, it truly was one of the most monumental moves that we made. We really saved, the birthday parties, or we would send our kid with their own snack. And so, it's hard at first. It is. I'm not going to lie, but it's fun now because, my daughter, she'll say even before like going to a birthday party the next day, she's like, well, I'm going to eat healthier today. So if there is something there that I feel comfortable having, then I can. Or she'll go and she'll be like, there was food coloring in it and I shouldn't have had it. And here's what's really great when you can stick with it when they're younger, and it might feel right hard. When they get older, it is now so beautiful knowing that when she would want something that I would be in complete disagreement with, right? You can control it when they're younger. When they get older, I would be like, it's your choice. We've been through this. You know how it makes you feel. And so it's your choice if you want to have it. Well, she did that a few times and she felt terrible afterwards. And so she learned on her own that she did not feel well when she had these things, but it was meeting her where she was at, and also, right, letting go a little bit and giving her some flexibility in this so that she could find her own way through it. And so that was really powerful as well.
Yeah, I have 3 teenagers, and I go through this every single day where they're out in the world. They're young adults basically making the choices on their own. And so the thing we always say is, if you do something bad for your body, do something good. It's kind of like what you just described. The excellent example is like sugar dampens your immune system, it gets those white blood cells tamped down, and depletes magnesium. Those are 2 very specific things that happen when you eat sugar. So like I've told my kids that. So like, you're going to eat sugar. Are you getting your magnesium in? Is there cold going around the school right now? Well, you're going to eat a lot of sugar. You're making yourself susceptible. You have those conversations, and then it's balance. Like we're all like, nobody's perfect. Like you just do the best you can. But if you put those kinds of parameters around, like you do something bad for your body, do something good for your body, it helps you move towards balance.
Listen, and a lot of grace for, I'm going to give myself a lot of grace, right? From the beginning of where I started to where I am now, I'm in a completely different realm. But for the parents listening, like, look, we weren't taught any of this, right? We weren't taught the
Mm-hmm.
parenting techniques. We weren't taught, a lot of the dietary and nutrition information on how to live a healthy
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle. So I think what's really unique right now with what's happening in the world is this isn't just for our kids, right? This
No.
is
Mm-mm.
this is this is for us too. Like if we want to have long, fulfilling lives, growing old and seeing our grandkids, like this isn't just for them. This is
Right.
for us too.
Right. I mean, this generation of kids is the most impacted, no doubt. But when a family goes through that healing journey, looking at the root causes, everybody gets better. You're gonna put
Right.
cancer off. You're gonna stave off the heart disease that would have set in 20 years earlier. The arthritis that's going to make your hip hurt, in your 40s when it's supposed to be your 90s, if at all. You can stave that stuff off. The whole family benefits when you use this lens to look for the root causes.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up a bit on the health component because I would like to get into cultural for the last 8 minutes of our time together. So, you know what? One of the biggest regrets I had, and maybe you felt this way as well, Beth, but it goes to what we were just talking about. Like, I didn't know what was going on, right? When a lot of this was starting. But if you have any inclination, right, that something might be off with how your child is feeling, lean into that, right?
Mhm.
Again, with where my daughter was, the longer things go on, right? The longer things are adding up, the longer things are breaking down. And so I get that this can be scary, right? And like you said, is it my parenting? Is it something I'm doing? Listen, get with a provider. You can go to the Epidemic Answers website. You're certainly welcome to lean in with me through the Joss District and have a care navigation support system there. But don't do this alone, right? You really are able to go to the beginning of this and really help your loved one get the help that they need so that they can feel better, that your family can function well again, get your finances back on track, right? Like we threw so much money at this at the beginning that was a complete waste because we just wanted our child better. Like there
Mhm.
really is a rhythm to this
Mhm.
or a
Mhm.
structure. And if you
Mhm.
get with the right people, I mean, my God, you could save yourself $50,000, right? I mean, there are families that are literally, I mean, spending their savings trying to help their kid better. And there are resources out there that can help you better line this up. So again, it could be toxic load, it could be oxidative stress, it could be metals, it could be diet, it could be chemicals in foods, but we can help reduce toxic load, we can get the right diets in place. So that is hope. That is good news right there, and it's possible. Anything
Mhm.
you would add to that before we jump into the cultural component?
Yeah, so I just would say that we created Healing Together as a community for that very reason, is like so
Yes.
that you don't have to go out on your own and try and navigate this. Like we have twice a month, and we're hoping to increase these calls,
Mhm.
live calls. One is with health with integrative doctors. You get like
Yeah.
for so little, you get to ask the integrative doctors questions that you might have, and then we have health coaches available for the other call. So it is such a great community. And then there's tons of resources, ebooks and videos for parents. Like my favorite video is made by Len Arcuri, who has an autism coaching business, and his parent education module is on how to get your spouse on board. That
Mhm.
could not be more important because usually it's one parent who's like navigating this on their
Yep.
own, and the other parent isn't supportive. Why are we doing this? You're crazy. They're spending all this money. Da da da. He is from a couple where they're a team. Mom and dad are a team. And how does that happen? How do you make that happen for your family? So there's tons of resources like that. So that's you can navigate to Healing Together by either going to epidemicanswers.org or documentinghope.com, and that community is linked on both of those pages.
It has been instrumental in my journey, and I highly advocate for any parenting. And it is so incredibly cost effective. I mean, what is it? You can do it monthly for, is it like $22?
$22 a month. Yeah. So
Yeah,
we're trying to, yeah, yeah. It's way more expensive to do it, but we have donors who've subsidized it so that we can make it as available as possible to parents.
and we'll make sure to get that information in the show notes for this podcast episode as well. So I would like to take a few minutes. This isn't just an individual issue anymore. So
Mhm.
what I see happening is, you take my own example, right? I had to leave the workforce. This is not covered by a lot of insurance. Um, so many parents are needing to walk away. And so our government, in my opinion, right, like as women are looking, or parents or fathers are looking for ways to get involved, right? We don't have the right systems currently set up, right? Like disability right now is not recognized for parents to step away from their jobs, which for some of these kids, right, it needs to happen, and it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an employer and you currently are not looking into this type of coverage for employees, you are setting yourself up for families potentially needing to step away if you don't have the right childcare or work flexibility lined up for your employees. And so I would just love to hear your thoughts. I know we need so much reform and policy done as it's related to disabilities. We need so much reform and workplace development around families who are dealing with chronic illness, which is 1 out of 2 kids. We have a healthcare system that is not set up, and we have an educational system that 30% of kids are school avoidant, right? And so we have parameters from, I know in the state of Ohio, they're looking to crack down and put consequences on kids that are school avoidant. But a lot of these kids have social anxiety. They're chronically getting ill. They're having the neuroinflammation. They can't even focus or pay attention. They really are sick. So what do you think if we wave this magic wand? What are the types of systems, or what are some things that you feel that are really going to help set us up in the next 5-10 years to really be able to handle this?
Well, I think right now, today, I think a lot of parents need to opt out of the systems. I mean, that's just the hard reality. So the medical system, the education system, there's a lot of parents that are homeschooling and just their kids are thriving in that environment. And then the food system, go to the farmers markets instead of the grocery stores. Like that's what I mean by opting out of the system for now, while we're rebuilding the system in parallel, the systems that we need in parallel. So for example, you can vote with your dollars by, only purchasing products that are made safe for ones that are non-toxic. And it's a verification program, or EWG verified is another example. So vote with your dollars that way. Take your food dollars and go to the whole food. So, the more people do that, the more the new systems will be built. I'm confident that there are enough people that are aware of the brokenness of our systems that we are heading in the right direction. There's tons of people that are working on a regenerative agriculture right now, for example, that will help us build a better, more sustainable food system. There is a product right now. It's basically acetic acid, which is vinegar, which is hopefully going to be approved by the FDA to replace glyphosate, things like that. It's called contact organics if you're interested in using it yourself instead of, weed killer in your home environment. There are health coin exchanges, like people who are setting up financial systems where people can get services covered by paying into an integrative and holistic kind of system to get their services met for integrative and holistic care. So like these things are being built right now. So I'm optimistic in 10 years, we're probably going to have a whole lot of better systems. But for right now, each of us individually has to opt out of the system. Just don't go and get your Singulair for your asthma. Go do what you can to work on taking responsibility for your family's health. Take responsibility for providing good, nutritious food to whatever capacity you can. That's the way we're going to get the old systems to crumble. We need enough feet moving in that direction first.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's one of the whole points of the podcast is instead of participating, right, in what's going on out here, it's this, wait a minute, I have a choice in how this is going to go. I have a choice in what I can feed my family. I can have a choice in the type of work I either want to do or no longer want to do, right? Because I can't set my home environment up the way I need to for this child based on needing to stay at work. I have a choice in the type of providers that I can work with to get the plan and treatment and diagnosis in place for not only my child, but potentially your whole family. And so you have a choice. And I think that's where, from the Barbie movie and why this is Mama Trauma podcast is there are so many families and women walking around out here right now who feel like they want to die. And we don't need to feel that way any longer. We absolutely have new pathways, new channels, and awareness around what's going on around here, and then informing, right, the different ways that we want to move forward to care well and better for ourselves and our families. And so, Beth, it has been an absolute privilege. I, again, didn't even want to do this podcast series if you weren't going to be on it, because I truly feel this number one issue with helping families understand what's going on with their kids, it's influencing everything. And so if we can wake up to this, we really can change the trajectory of where we're going as a society, and we can heal ourselves and our families. And so thank you so much for joining me. I know that there's going to be lots of people who can access Epidemic Answers and Healing Together, and that they're going to be better for it. Join me next week as I get into the real deets of caregiving with my special guest, Lindsay Moffitt with Spectrum Able. She's a healer, hope dealer, and holistic nutritionist who has an unbelievable journey as a mother and provider in this space. Please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share the podcast with other caregivers who are needing support as they move onward in their day-to-day lives. Thanks again to our sponsors, Precision Chiropractic, Jennifer Panzician with Edward Jones, Dutch Maids, the Avalon Foundation, and Chica Creative for helping us land the mothership in the real world. The information provided in the podcast is for general informational purposes only and should not be considered a substitute for professional medical, health, or nutritional advice.